Coogs House, the Houston Cougars football schedule is officially out for 2024, and there is a path to bowl season.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, the daily podcast all about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, Parker Ainsworth, here to break down all things Cougs. If you're a U of H fan or just a hater who came to stop by, please be sure to subscribe down below. That way you can latest on the Cougs in your newsfeed each and every day. We appreciate you making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. If you found us on YouTube, welcome back to the YouTube channel. It's so good to see you again. Doing a giveaway every 250 subscribers on YouTube. The next one's at 2,000. Almost there. Hit subscribe. Also get there, like, comment on the video. Let's know you're in that contest. If you don't know what to say in this one, after talking about football schedule and bowl season and what that would look like and so on, tell us in the comments down below, honestly, who are you taking the Super Bowl? All right. Now, I want to talk about a couple options and how this football season can go now that the schedule is out. But first, we should probably make sure we talk some about what that schedule looks like. We're going to talk some about what games they should have that they must win, or what games they have on the schedule they must win, what games that are kind of 50-50 up in the air games, and what games they have the potential to really upset people. The first segment, I want to talk some about games that they must win to consider this a successful season, or games that they certainly ought to win, given no extraneous circumstances I can't foresee right now. But first, let's look at the whole schedule in that portion of the show here, because you see a handful of things here. One, you open the season with UNLV. We knew as much. Second week is at Oklahoma. That's been set in stone for a while now. Rice at home in week 3 is relatively new. You go to Cincinnati, start Big 12 play. Iowa State the following week to wrap up September. And then on either Friday or Saturday of the week after, you go to TCU to hopefully avenge a tough loss from a year ago. Interesting that following a bye week, you go to Arrowhead to play Kansas. More on that later, but that's after a bye week at Arrowhead to play Kansas. Utah comes to Houston on the 26th. Then you head out, then you stay home. You have Kansas State at home, and back-to-back home weeks before heading out to Arizona on what could be a Thursday, Friday, or Saturday game. Then Baylor, then BYU to wrap the season at home. And as I look at those games, I see a couple of games that Houston has to win if they want to have a successful bowl season, flirting with bowl season type of year, right? There's some games on there that you just need to check off and make sure you get because of how difficult that schedule may be. First and foremost, I'm going to say that Houston needs to win the opener against UNLV. Now, I know UNLV is talented. UNLV went 9-5 last year. Barry Odom is back. Brendan Marion is back. The full staff is returning. It looks like the major players and staff, should say, are returning. They were top 25 in points per game last season as a football program. And they were getting over 415 yards per game. However, they were also bottom 40 in opponents' points per game, and they're letting up 415 yards. You're playing them the opening week. They will not know what to expect out of the Houston offense. Frankly, you and I won't know a whole lot about what to expect from the Houston offense, though we'll do our best to figure that out between now and then. They won't have any game film on who lines up where. We're assuming the quarterback will be Donovan Smith. For all we know, it could be Zion Chris, right? Like, there's no necessarily assumptions you can make going into week 1. That plus home crowd, plus the opening of the Fritz era, the excitement that's bringing into year 2 in the Big 12. Frankly, Big 12 recruiting should be taking place. Pancake Hunter at center, right? One of the highest touted recruits to ever come through Houston should be making a start on the offensive line this fall, right? Like, those kinds of chips falling into place make me think Houston has to beat UNLV. It's frankly the kind of thing that makes me also think Houston has to beat Rice in week 3. Now, there's an added layer of that one that's obviously there's some vengeance. Now, it's not the same McCaffrey, JT Daniels matchup between that offense Rice had, but Houston sleptwalked through the first half of that one and still almost came back and won in double overtime. shouldn't be sleepwalking through it a second time in 2 years, right? It is a home game as well. So not that it's like a big travel to get to Rice or back and forth, but you hope for a home crowd, big loud student section. Um, I will say that my criticism of Thank for the Rice game did have to do with coaching and preparedness, because motivating your guys to play is a coaching thing. I don't envision that being a problem with the upcoming staff, and we frankly know that with just a talent perspective, guys like Sam Brown, guys like Joe Manjack, that those things ought to be enough to pull off a victory against a Rice team in a given year. Houston has not lost to Rice in back-to-back years except for once. That was 2000 and 2001, at kind of the doldrum, the lowest points, you could argue. Some people might say the late 90s, but that 2000, 2001 is as low a point as Houston Cougar football's ever had. And that's the only time in the history of this rivalry that Houston has lost to Rice in back-to-back years. Got to think Houston bounces back and gets that one to show that this is a different kind of season than it was last year. If for nothing else, just for the vibes of it, just for the metaphor of it. I think, and this may be a hot take, if you look at the Big 12 slate for Houston, the following week, week 3, is also a must win. Now, you're heading to Cincinnati. I know that's difficult. I know that's challenging. And last year you lost by 10, and really it felt worse than that. You scored with a little less than 4 minutes to go to make it just 10 when it was 17. But it's both teams' first conference game of 2024. So you're catching them kind of the same spot in the season. It's not like they've had a much more difficult or much crazier, more challenging schedule to that point. They should be at the same spot in the season. And moreover, they're not at a horribly different spot in their program. Yes, they had some success. Was it 3 years ago at this point? 4 years ago, they got college football playoff bound and bounced. But different coaching staff. They made the same adjustments, moved to the same conference from the same conference that you were in. Frankly, I would point out that just like Houston's changed coaches, things like that too, but they were also in the AAC title game the same year. So you see a program that you see a lot of yourself in from a national perspective, a national relevancy perspective. And Houston, to prove that they are cut above where they were last year, needs to have a better performance. Now, winning on the road in Ohio will be hard. I don't mean to say it won't be. I'm sure Cincinnati fans will be out there cheering on their first home Big 12 opener, right? And all that kind of stuff. But I feel like at the big thing in this one is going to be Houston with more running game and stuff this year. And we know Fritz and Barbie will bring a little bit more toughness to the running game and that side of the football. I don't think they'll be out time of possession like they were in the first Cincinnati game last year's Cincinnati game in Houston. Cincinnati won the time possession last year, 37 minutes to 23 minutes, roughly, a few seconds here and there. I would imagine that gets closer to 50-50 in this game, just because Houston should be so much more invested in running the ball. Last but not least, got to win them kind of game I see on the schedule is Baylor. Baylor was one of just 2 Big 12 victories you had in 2023. The only one that you see on the schedule in 2024. You beat them in Waco at that giant new stadium. You're seeing them now coming to Houston. Have to think you're in a better spot with a new coaching staff. Frankly, have to think that Baylor might be in a worse spot with the same coaching staff, right? They kept Dave Aranda there in town. By that point in the season, too, you're catching Baylor really, really late, second to last week of the season. It would not be unheard of for them to be coachless at that point in the season, because we know Aranda was on the hot seat, like hot seat, and not fired at the end of the season. If they are having a disappointing year to that point, you could very well see guys pulling their own names out because they don't want to play. They want to get in the transfer portal and save their eligibility, call it a redshirt year, whatever. Aranda fired, all kinds of things could be going down in Waco. It could be a bad scene by that point, and you can't waste that opportunity to get a conference win, especially, again, against a team that you beat a year ago. Now, these are all football games happening next fall, and those are football games that Houston has to win next fall. But there's one really, really big football game that you might have heard about coming up in just about 10 days or so from now. And it's the Super Bowl time of year. Happy Super Bowl time of year to all people who celebrate, especially those people from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday can be really weird. I've said this before, but I'm the kind of person that sits in my house. I don't want people talking to me. I get a full Super Bowl spread for just me and my wife too. But I want to see the commercials. I want to see the game. I don't want any interruptions from anyone. Being out and social during the game can kind of make that hard to do. Now, with that said, I do love to put a little bit extra skin on it if that's your vibe, right? I'm not going to tell you have to, but if you're going to do it, you can go check out what they got going at FanDuel because right now, if you put down $5, right, and that bet wins, you get $200 back in bonus bets. All kinds of cool options on here. Obviously, they got the game itself. They got the Chiefs, and I guess they tell me that guy's name is Patrick Mahomes. He looks more like Michael Jordan, the quarterback, to me, at just a 1.5-point dog. The Chiefs are dogs. You got to look at that one. They got all kinds of cool special bets, too, about combining rushing yards on people or combining sack counts and totals on people, what the coin toss is, what color the Gatorade is, all those kinds of things are all over FanDuel. So if it's FanDuel.com/lockedon thing, get that $5 bet down. That wins. You get $200 back in bonus bets. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so the second segment I want to talk about are games I think Houston has a 50-50 shot of taking. And frankly, if they take just two of if they win the must-wins and take just two of the 4 50-50 games as I see them, then honestly, that's bowl eligible right there. Now, I know that's not technically how it works. Every time, if you flip a coin 4 times, it won't always come up heads twice and tails twice. But statistically speaking, I think those odds are in our favor. That said, you looked at the schedule with me. I said I see 4 50-50 games. I think the average Houston Cougar fan is saying 3. I see 4, and here's my hot take, because I think Oklahoma in Norman is a game Houston can steal in week 2. It's 50-50 to me because if you look at the roller coaster of a season they had in 2023, that looks to be continuing as they go into 2024, right? Things do not look steady there as they bring in a young and experienced quarterback in Jackson Arnold. Now, Jackson Arnold was a top-tier high school recruit out of the DFW Metroplex and all those kinds of things and whatever and blah, blah, blah. But he doesn't have a whole lot of starts under his belt, right? Yes, it's in Norman, but we've seen Houston weather that storm before for sure. We've also seen, frankly, in Norman, how once things go south, they get really upset with their own guys really, really fast. I mean, Ed Oliver kind of retired Bob Stoops in a weird way, right? Like Houston's done this thing before when they really were kind of getting it rolling, right? Now, Oklahoma looks beatable, frankly. They'll have eyes set in their own way on SEC things down the road. They lose questionable games to teams that they, on a paper with a star chart might not supposed to lose all the time. That's not uncommon for that program. I would argue that they took a step back in coaching when they made the coaching change a few years ago and sent Riley out to California. Or I guess Riley left to go to California. I should make it clear. They didn't send him out there. And I think they're still recovering from that. So they're still figuring out as a program what they look like next. And I think they look at like a team that Houston can upset in this 50-50 block of window. Now, the other games I think people could look at and see are very naturally 50-50 games. Iowa State's a tough program, but Houston gets them at home this year. And I think that's a 50-50 game. As you look at that one, you're coming back from Cincinnati. I think that Cincinnati game is a must-win. But especially if you were to drop that one somehow, you do have to come back and take your business at home against Iowa State. It's a Big 12 home opener. That says it's the first Big 12 opponent to come to town next season. That's a big deal as well. If Iowa State wins a couple games early and things go crazy, they might be a ranked team at that point. It wouldn't be unheard of to see them as a ranked team that early in the season. They were just about a 500 team a year ago, have a decent amount of returners. It's the kind of game where I think in 2023, I would have worried about Houston winning. In 2024, with the improvements I think we've made in the coaching staff and the improvements I think we're making on the roster and just the growth and development of the guys that we've got, another year in college football getting bigger, faster, stronger. I think this is the kind of game that, again, Houston can win 50% of the time. And if we get a few of those to happen, I think that's why Iowa State's one of those games that you could see Houston win to help get to bowl eligibility. TCU. Now, this is one to work with me on. TCU is a game I'm saying is a 50-50 game for Houston as well. It could be Friday or Saturday, October 4th or 5th. It's on the road. I know people are saying that's like, oh, that road games in the Big 12, and especially with basketball in the mind, road games in the Big 12 feel impossible sometimes. But I will say that the DFW Metroplex, if you look at the trips on this schedule, is as close or closer than anything you could be doing. There is a very realistic world where that like 5.5 hour drive or whatever it is to Fort Worth is closer than like a day at the airport with flying is to get to somewhere like Provo, right? Like that's just the way that works. And so if people are going to go to any road game, going to go take in any atmosphere, going to go see any new place to play, it would be Fort Worth. And I'd recommend it, frankly, because it's not Dallas, notably not Dallas. It's near Dallas. I would also point out that because it's not so far away, it's doable in a weekend. Like you can get up, if the game ends up being on a Saturday, you can get up on Saturday morning, get out there, have fun Saturday night at Billy Bob's or whatever they say to do. Yeah, sure. And then come home on Sunday, where you can go do a full day kind of stuff as far as making a weekend out of it goes. It's also, for what it's worth, a program that in 2023 on the football side of this, while they did beat Houston, I get it, had a disappointing year in their own right. They were in the national championship game the year before and kind of laid an egg in 2023. It's looking more and more like, honestly, Sonny kind of won with Gary Patterson's kids the year before, and caught some lucky breaks. They won a bunch of one-score games in 2022. 2023, they did not. 2024, I think things continue to level out and regress to the mean. I think that's a game at a point in the season, especially if you look at it too, where it's in that middle point of the year, kind of teams are kind of figuring themselves out and separating themselves in different spots, where Houston can go get one. Friday night games, weeknight games are a thing that Houston's a lot more used to, at least as a program and things like that. And the kids in the program have been in them for sure, more so than the average Big 12 kid. I think Houston's got a shot down Friday or Saturday, but I think Friday could help Houston, weirdly. Especially if you look at they're coming off of a home game the week before. Their next game is at Kansas. I think it's another 50-50 game in my head as I see it. Now, you'll notice that looks like on the schedule that it's 2 road games in a row. However, there's a bye week in between there. So there will be plenty of time to come home, get healed up, get rested up. And frankly, if they played TCU on the Friday, the 4th of October, you actually kind of have an extra day on top of that in the bye week to get ready for Kansas. Kansas is going to be doing this weird thing in 2024 where they're playing all of their conference road games at Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City, Missouri. The University of Kansas will be playing their home games in the state of Missouri. Technically, it's like just on the other side of the border within Kansas City, right? It's a little over an hour away from campus by my quick Google map searching. And I will say that that's the home conference games. The home non-conference games are playing at wherever Sporting Kansas City plays. I didn't care to look that up because it didn't affect us a whole lot. But I think that that's going to be more difficult for Kansas to navigate than people are talking about. I think Kansas, well, they've built a decent little football program the last couple of years and maybe looking to kind of, continue to expound on that with the new stadium and stuff, new renovations, and that's why they're playing elsewhere, obviously. I think they're going to be vulnerable in 2024 because of that. And call it intuition, call it faith in Willie Fritz, call it optimism. I think Houston's primed in position to take advantage of that, coming off of a bye week to go to a not neutral field. It's obviously going to be more Kansas folks than not, but a place that's relatively easy to get to via plane for a Houston Cougar fan. It's a, frankly, trip that I think fans will want to take because how many times we get to see Houston Cougar football in a pro stadium that is not NRG, right? Like I think that's a big deal for people that want to go see this and help kind of not necessarily 50-50 neutral the field, but help kind of sway it, put a little bit more red in the stands. I really, really think that those kind of things are going to play a factor. I also think that this, like playing a game that far away and all, I think that's going to wear on Kansas over the course of the year. You're catching them in the latter half of October. I think that adds up. I also think, again, that they're just not going to be as good as they were last year from looking at their roster, who's coming, who's going. So I think all those things add to make another 50-50 game. All of those 50-50 games, right? If you win half of them and you win the must-wins, you're bowl eligible. Now, that's a big deal for Houston in the first year Willie Fritz Era. I don't care who you ask. But again, as we said, if you flipped a coin 4 times, you're not going to get 2 heads and 2 tails. So you might need to pull off an upset against someone that you maybe have worse odds against to beat. I think I want to talk some about that in the third segment and what the consequence of that might be. All right, so I mentioned that in the third segment, there are some games that Houston might have to win that I guess technically get listed as upsets, right? Teams that Vegas will have the odds stacked against Houston in, right? That happens. It's weird, but it does happen, right? It does happen. Um, I look at these games as games that Houston can kind of make some noise nationally by knocking off programs that College Game Day won't say Houston should be winning, right? But the first one of those I want to start off with is actually not the first one in, I don't believe it's not the first in order of like how they happen, but Kansas State, as you look at it, Houston plays them on November 2nd, right? Now, I say to say that's late in the season, so I may feel a whole lot different about them by then. But the game is at home. If Houston's potentially fighting for bowl eligibility, that'll be really important. If Will Fritz has really turned the culture of this program around like we think he will, that could be kind of when you're starting to see those kinds of things take hold and settle, right? You're also seeing a Kansas State team that had a lot of talent a year ago is going to look a little bit different this season. I mean, Cooper Beebe is going to be a pro. He's gone. We remember him running over Texas secondaries, his running through, chipping up on blocks downfield and stuff like that. I mean, that monster behemoth of a man is gone. Whew, he's gone. You also get the roster and quarterback Will Howard, who diced Houston last year, diced them, tore them apart, is now at Ohio State via the transfer portal. Good for him. Kudos. He's also out the Big 12, so good for us. And I know that they're really fond of some of the guys. They had a really highly touted quarterback in the class of 2020, what was that, 3, who we saw run the ball a little bit last year, but only a couple times against Houston coming in. Having not seen him throw a whole lot of college football passes, he supposedly has a giant arm, like a deep threat kind of arm. But I'm interested to see how defensive mastermind that is Willie Fritz makes him play accurately and what happens when a young quarterback looks young against Willie Fritz. I think Kansas State's a winnable game, and I think it's going to be an uphill battle in the Vegas odds books for sure for a bunch of good reasons. But it's one I think theoretically, if Houston had to get a 6th win, you could find a way to talk yourself into that one being one. Now, obviously, every week I'm going to talk myself into Houston winning each of these games. That's just the way I go about my week. But the one before that might be trappier, and that is Utah. Now, Utah is at home. That is a game, I guess, that being a home game should be theoretically in Houston's favor. However, Utah of the Big 12 edition of the Pac-12 additions to the Big 12 coming in next season is by far and away going to be the most challenging for Houston. Just in terms of where their program is at the present tense, they're a very, very strong program. Kyle Winningham is a good coach. They have been in the running to win the Pac-12 several years in a row now. I think they won 2 of the last 3. Good football program they got over there in Salt Lake City. I keep thinking of BYU as the Salt Lake City program, but that's Utah. And I have to say that I think the thing that makes me encouraged about that one, why Houston could upset that team, is we saw Utah struggle when they came to the state of Texas last year to play Baylor. Baylor, as bad as they were last season, nearly beat Utah, and frankly was a bad pass interference no call away from beating Utah just last fall. Now, the deal for Houston will be that game was pretty early in the season, week 2, and I would argue in watching that one, because I was like, what is going on here? It looked like the heat of Waco in September got to Utah. I don't know that we'll have that advantage in this game in late October, but I do think that you'll have other advantages at this point in the season. I also think, for what it's worth, that not having to go to Utah at that point may be an advantage in and of itself, right? Like the weather difference there might help you out some. Other difficult games at Arizona, which could be on the Thursday, Friday, or Saturday of that week, and I guess that's mid-November. Sorry, is challenging. Just difficult program. It's gonna be a very difficult place to play. Um, I don't. How do I say this poetically? I don't mean to say there's nothing to do in Arizona, but I do mean to say that there's nothing better than watching a college football game to do in Arizona. And if that game is at night on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, that student section will be getting ready since Tuesday, right? And so I think the trick will be is that will be a challenging game, and uh, just from an atmosphere perspective, I know they're going through some movement the last couple of years in their program and this and that, but they've had talent before. They tapped into Southern California for that talent. Frankly, they tapped into the state of Texas for that talent as well. It won't be a difficult place to play in terms of weather. It should be hot and dry year round. It won't be the point of the year where that's too terribly cold in Arizona at night. I say that now, it'll be a freaking snowstorm, but you catch my drift there. I just think it's going to be that challenging of an environment to play in. Now, on the field, again, they're a program with some turnover. We're talking about the end of the season. Guys will have that much more time on task in the Willie Fritz era, and the Willie Fritz culture, and so on. And so you could see those kinds of things go Houston's way by that point. And last but not least, if you have not figured it out, I have circled BYU to end the season. Houston plays BYU the Saturday after Thanksgiving up in Provo. Now, that one concerns me from a couple different perspectives. One, I would point out that that's a difficult place to play. Those fans can be raucous. We saw them in the basketball stadium, frankly. We just saw them a couple weeks ago. Was it a week ago? Was that just a week ago? In the basketball stadium, they get after it. People don't associate Mormons with like turning up for things like that, but they get nuts for the sporting events. I would also point out that BYU is historically a team that has incredibly good line play. They typically, because of the way missionary things work like that with them, will have guys that are a little bit older, a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. They've just been, frankly, working out longer. They're just older kids. And that's not to say everyone that program is by any stretch, but typically have those kinds of guys on their roster. They're typically very good in the trenches. I'd point out that's a program that is doing well in the recruiting cycle as well. And when you see them play next year, don't be surprised if you remember the quarterback's name, Gary Bohannon. He is the same guy from South Florida a couple years ago. He is transferred to BYU. He's a dual threat guy. He can present some problems. Game after Thanksgiving in Utah, could be snowing, could be crazy weather, could be hurting Houston in all those ways. Having a dual threat guy quarterback could be a big benefit to them in those kind of situations. And that one worries me. Now, if you told me Houston won one or two of those potential upset games, I wouldn't be horribly surprised. I don't see a game on this schedule that, frankly, I'm worried about. I don't think Houston can win. I think that's a positive of the schedule. Other positives of the schedule are that there are exactly 6 home games and exactly 6 road games. If we count Arrowhead as a true road game, I guess technically neutral, but you feel me on that. They are that if you look at their opening of the season, 3 of the first 4 Big 12 games are on the road. That seems challenging, but 2 of the first 3 games are at home, so it should be well to do there. I would argue that the 2 out of 3 end of season games on the road, at Arizona, at home versus Baylor, and at BYU, that stretch is actually more challenging than Cincinnati, Iowa State at home, and TCU are. I do think having 2 buys is nice. You have one in mid-October and one in mid-November. It kind of spaces out the season in a nice way where, like, once you get past Kansas State, you can kind of breathe before that rough stretch to end it. You also, though, still have a break in, like, the true mid-season to kind of recollect and kind of reaffirm your values and your culture as a program. I think it's an interesting schedule for Houston for sure, and I think there's a real path to bowl eligibility. When you look at bowls that the Big 12 puts teams in with affiliations and stuff like that, We're talking about things that, like the Independence Bowl in Shreveport. Yes, that could be back at the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, which would be kind of full circle in a weird way. There's a shot we get to play in the Pop-Tarts Bowl, get to go eat a Pop-Tart. That would be a lot of fun. And then obviously on the big end, you get things like Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl or the Cotton Bowl and things like that. So there's all kinds of options for Big 12 teams out there if Houston gets to bowl eligibility. And I think looking at that schedule, there's a real shot. If you think I'm a crazy person, tell me in the comments down below. I can take it. I got the skin for it. Now, I will say, if you think I'm like a crazy person for other reasons, let's talk about let's think about things before we say them though. Thank you all so much for listening to Locked On Cougs today. Locked On Cougs is a primarily Locked On podcast. Now, it is your team every day. Go Cougs.